Welcome to our Monday Night Memories series, brought to our good friends, Nate Barrett, of course, which is a good friend by definition, and Chariot Auto Group, Twin City, been great sponsors of ours over the years. And this is really a special deal for Nate and I both, I think. And this is a series that we're going to run for the next 12, 13, 14. How many guys we get, I don't know, from the 2000 Rose Bowl team. And, of course, 2001 Rose Bowl, a special year for Purdue football, for Purdue athletics as well. And not surprisingly, some really great insights from the guys that were there. And that's who we're going to be talking to throughout this series. And our first one, Nate, Chukky Okobi. Few guys will forget him as a center, number 56, tough-minded guy. But first, thanks for not only the partnership, but bringing this to light, because I know this means a lot to you.
It does. I was thinking, Alan, as we were talking about this, that the big spread that Twin City was part of with a lot of the car dealers and businesses in town, in the Journal and Courier, for that special section for the Rose Bowl. Yeah. You might remember that, a large section that there's really only been two of those like that in history, back in the 60s with Bob Greasy and Leroy's team, and then the 2000 team. But when you talk about Chukky, I was thinking about how he did kind of the lead in the fire up video on the Jumbotron. If you remember that, he was kind of getting the students, getting the stadium ready for the game, and with that great personality, and just part of a legendary offensive line for that team.
Yeah, no question. And great football teams are led by their offensive lines and great leaders. And Chukky Okobi's made a profession out of leadership as well. You will enjoy this interview. It's one of the best ones, not because of the interviewer, but the interviewee, Chukky Okobi, really insightful. And I think you'll really enjoy this as a Purdue fan of that 2001 Rose Bowl team, but also as a fan of Chukky Okobi. So without further ado, here's our interview with Chukky. Alan Karpick here with Chukky Okobi. Purdue fans have never forgotten Chukky Okobi and what he brought to the table, not only from an enthusiasm standpoint, but a skill level. Purdue's offensive line. Drew Brees had a lot to do with the success of that football team in 2000, in the 2001 Rose Bowl, but that offensive line might have been the cornerstone of what really made this happen. Chukky, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Anytime we want to talk about the Boilermakers, I'm in. So thanks for having me.
Hey, Chukky, and I'm going to start with that because the offensive line and its role in the 2000 season, and the fact that you guys had come together as a group, and you played together for a while, with the exception, I think, of Gene Murskowski being the only really newcomer in 2000. Had some fun with you. You got Journal and Courier did a fun shoot with Speedos. We had you in a limousine. Talk about just that role, and you obviously play at the NFL level as well, about how that offensive line really had a lot to do with the success of the 2000 Purdue team.
One of the interesting things about our group as offensive line, and even to this day, a lot of times people will ask about things that I've accomplished, sports and other aspects of life, and in that group, that offensive line from 2000 is probably the group I'm most proud of being a part of. And it's really a testament to Coach Tiller and the cultural change that we experienced when he came in 97. And, when you look at that line, with the exception of myself, the other three seniors that were on that line, none of them came in as offensive linemen.
Right.
And so, it's really how Coach Tiller changed the way that we looked at ourselves as a football program. And that trickled down to the individuals, where they embraced, being able to contribute in a way that maybe they didn't anticipate coming in. And in the end, you go with somebody like Matt Light going from tight end to offensive line, and look at the difference that made in his life.
Yeah.
And, same with Ian, same with Brandon. And so to me, the biggest thing when I think about that group is, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at start to change. And there's a lot of stories, if we talk to any one of those guys about their switch from defense to offense, or from a skilled player to offensive line, that, I can imagine, I can't speak for them, but I can imagine that transition for them as men really changed the way that they have navigated life, even since all of us finished playing in the NFL.
Yeah, and Rob Turner as well in that group. You know, I mean, it is an interesting group because you were all. Well, I shouldn't say. Well, you were all. Everybody's a personality. I mean, Brandon Gordon was a quiet guy, as I recall. Matt Light was who Matt Light was. There ain't nobody quite like Chukky Okobi. But talk about how, as a group, you learn to meld together, and of course, Danny Hope coaching you guys, and Jim Chaney is the OC. Kind of a perfect storm of getting an organization together to work well.
Yeah, it's everybody had their role to play. I mean, literally, each person played a different position, but at the same time, each person brought a different energy to the offense, into what we were doing. You know, I always, saw. You take a look at Matt Light. Matt Light was the guy. He was the left tackle, which is usually the premier position on the offensive line.
Sure.
And he was, physically the most talented player we had on offensive line. One thing I always prided myself on was being the energetic or emotional leader. The first one to fight the other team. I'm the last one to run from that fight, and that was just the role that I played. And the really good thing about having so many different personalities, so many different energies, is everyone's a teacher and everyone's a student. And I don't know what all those guys learned from me. Sometimes I probably took myself a little too seriously. And that, when I, being able to make that judgment on myself is really a testament to what I learned from Matt Light. Now, Matt Light, Matt Light, was mentoring a baseball player from my high school. And he was asking me about different guys I played with, Troy Polamalu, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger. And I said, I'm going to tell you about Matt Light. And he's from, the kid's from New England, so he knew who Matt Light was.
Yeah.
And I said, the biggest lesson I ever learned from Matt Light is do not take yourself so serious.
Yeah.
And, and it's funny because I remember when I was with Tom Brady this was a year after we won a Super Bowl. And I ran into Tom Brady in New York City. And obviously he played with Gene, he played with Brandon, he played with Light. And so we got, obviously that became, our commonality, our common connections became a topic of discussion. And the thing that Tom Brady said was, man, if I could just get Matt Light to care about football. I remember that. But I'm going to tell you this story about Light. This actually came from the 99 season.
Yeah.
And, we were going into the game against Penn State.
At home.
At home. They had those two edge rushers, Courtney Brown, LeVar Arrington, went 1 and 2 in the draft the next year. And obviously I played center. I played right guard at the time. So so those guys that was Light's problem.
Yeah.
That wasn't my problem. And so we're watching the film, and Coach Hope is running the film and watching the film, and our offensive line room, it was kind of, there's a lot more chairs in there than there were players. So guys kind of spread out. But in the front row, I was sitting in the front row. Light was sitting a couple seats away from me in the front row. So as I'm watching the film, all of a sudden I hear, I'm like, what the heck? And so I look and I see Light over there like this. So I tapped him and I was like, hey, you're playing against the best defensive players in the country. Shouldn't you be paying attention? And I'll never forget his answer. He said, it's just going to mess me up, man. I can't worry about what they're going to do. Let them worry about what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And he goes right back to sleep. And we ended up losing that game right there at the end.
Yeah, he had a chance.
But what really struck me was when we turned on that film, Matt Light won that battle.
Yeah.
He beat the living snot out of those guys. And, that's a testament to why he was so highly coveted going into the draft. And it's because he realized that this is still this football that we've been playing since we were kids. Let's not turn this into more than what it is. And we had a lot of fun. And so, that story just came to mind.
Oh, no, that's a great story. And I think you guys, again, with the Speedo shoot and the limousine shoot, you guys were just a great group to be around. I mean, I can see why. I mean, it was infectious. That would be the best word of in your own personalities for certain.
Mm.
All right, the season, and you've from a leadership quotient and all your playing days was an interesting one. I mean, you get off to you have a couple of easier games to open up at Central Michigan and Kent, go to Notre Dame, and a team that you should have beaten. I think everybody would admit that you didn't. But every season has ups and downs, and you got to overcome things that don't go quite the way you want. What do you recall from even after Notre Dame or even after Penn State, another game in Week 5 that you probably would like to have back again from a number of perspectives? But what did you learn from that, and what did you learn from it from a 2000 fall of 2000 perspective, but also looking at it now, all that you know now that team went through to get to where it had to get to?
That team in 2000, I got to start even before that season.
Yeah.
And, it goes back to when I got to Purdue in 1996. And, Coach Coletto, loved Coach Coletto.
Yeah.
Great man, gave me an opportunity. It was the only scholarship offer I received. And so, obviously he's always going to have a special place in my heart, Jim Coletto.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was one of the few people like myself, like Matt Light, Brandon Gore, Ian Allen. We experienced the contrast in the culture. We came in 96 under Coletto. That was our only college football experience. So, But when Coach Tiller came, everything changed. And what Coach Tiller changed was the way we looked at ourselves, the way that we saw ourselves, the way that what we believed the P on the side of our helmet meant. And he let us know that we got to define that. And that's what really led to the shift in 1997. Obviously the Notre Dame win. And from there, the ball really started rolling, a couple of bowl games. Going into the 2000 season, especially with the best quarterback on the planet coming back for a senior year, there's a lot of high hopes. From what I recall, I know we were ranked pretty high going into that season. And for the first time, I don't know, maybe ever, Purdue was favored to win the Big Ten in football. And so we were feeling really confident going into that season. Central Michigan, I mean, they're a MAC team, no disrespect, but, that kind of went down the way we thought it would go down.
Yeah.
Kent State, I will say they had some really good players on their defense against Kent State, particularly one of my teammates from the NFL, James Harrison, was on that defense.
Yeah, right.
And then we ended up losing those two games that we should have won against Notre Dame and against Penn State. We're looking at like a combined total of 3 or 4 points for those two games. So after that Penn State loss, I just, I kind of had an emotional break personally. And these are stories that people don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting there and I just remember pacing back and forth in my apartment, pacing back and forth. I only had one class that last semester to graduate. So I had a lot of time to think about this. I just remember pacing back and forth thinking like, we're literally like 3 or 4 points away. We were unranked at that point. We were 3 or 4 points away from being ranked number 1 in the nation. If we win those 2 games, we literally might be at the top. We started the season, we were like number 10.
Yeah.
Then we lost. We beat Notre Dame. We beat Penn State. Those would be defining victories for this program and would have put us really up close to the top. And so all of a sudden we're unranked.
Yeah.
And now we're getting ready to play a game against a team that we're probably not supposed to be in Michigan.
Right.
And so I was stressed out. Because I thought about 1996.
Yeah.
And all the things, everything Coach Tiller did, everything we did in those years leading up to it, and this opportunity that we created for ourselves. And all I could wonder is this who we are? Or is this who we are? Or we're never gonna be able to sit at the same table with the Notre Dames and the Penn States. Is that who we are? And you start to question that. And now Michigan's coming in. So my only thought was, we have to win this game.
Yeah.
We have to win this game. And if we don't win this game, then that is who we are.
Yeah.
And that was my only thought going into that Michigan game. And I was stressed out for days. So I went to Coach Tiller. I went to Coach Tiller on Wednesday or Thursday because we had a Thursday night meeting.
Yeah.
You know, where he goes, you know, every week. And so I went and asked him if I could speak to the team with no coaches in there. And, you know, had the Thursday night meeting. He went over special teams, defense, offense, said what he had to say, kicked everyone out. And I had an opportunity to share what was on my heart and what was on my mind with my teammates. And this is probably, you know, my most, that, you know, with all the wins, we got a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Crowd rushed the field a lot that year, but, you know, that meeting, that was probably my most treasured memory from my time at Purdue, and where I got to really, you know, share my perspective on who I believe we were, and kind of get everybody else to subscribe to what I was thinking. And I just remember I went into that meeting and I stood in front of the group and I asked Matt Light, I said, Matt Light, what year did you get here? He said, 1996. I said, what was our record? He said, 3-8. I said, Brandon, you were there, right? He said, yeah. I said, Ian? He said, yeah. And I said, Drew Brees, what year did you get here? He said, 1997. I said, okay. What was your recruiting class ranked amongst the 11 Big Ten teams? He said, he laughed and he said, we were 11th. And I said, guys, 3-8, the worst recruiting group in the Big Ten. If we don't win this game, that's who we are.
Yeah.
Because nobody remembers who came in second.
Yeah.
And I just remember, you know, pointing out the fact that we, you know, all of our expectations going to that season, we got the best quarterback on the planet. There's no reason why we can't win this game. And then in the back of my head, you know, I'm thinking, oh, look at all these freshmen on defense.
Yeah.
And, you know, thinking about Steve Hutchinson, Jeff Backus, David Terrell. And I'm just like, defense? And I remember I looked dead at Stu Schweiger.
Yeah.
Defense sitting in the back. And Stu was a starter. And I said,
yeah,
you were good when we recruited you. You took a scholarship to play defense, so just go do what you came here to do. I believe you're going to stop them. I don't, you know, I know what everyone's going to say. Oh, they're going to run over that defense. I don't believe that. I believe you're going to stop them. And then we go into that game and we're down by 18.5. And I just remember jogging off the field, you know, he took a knee right there at the half, jogging into the locker room. And I remember thinking, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed. And, you know, getting to their coaches, you know, make their adjustments. And everyone's getting hyped to go back onto the field. And I just screamed. I said, everybody just stop. Do you still believe me? And they said, yeah. And I said, then let's go. And we just went out there, and the rest is history, because that started a chain of events that led to us really owning our new identity as a program. Not just this season. It wasn't about the Rose Bowl. It was about, you know, it was about that P. It was about, you know, what it means to be a Purdue Boilermaker, and the fact that, you know, having players at that level, players like Aiken, players like Drew Brees, we have an opportunity to define what being a Boilermaker means. And that's really my biggest memories, especially how that season started, and, you know, that point when we were going into that Michigan game, and what that meant to me as an individual, and what that meant to us as a program.
The greatest comeback in the history of Purdue football. No team still, Chukky, has ever come. No Purdue team has ever come from 18 points behind. It's a little known fact, I tell you, and the fact that you do that. So everybody has. You're about as positive a guy as you're going to find, but you, like you said, you got to understand where you've been and where you're going. Travis misses a field goal with 3 minutes to go. You look like that one's going to get away from you at the end, even with all the comeback. Lloyd Carr and/or Drew Henson do you a favor by throwing on first down, as I recall. That might have helped things out, but Travis gets another chance. What? It's like, what was your? I can guess what your mindset was when he's lining up to kick it again. And Travis is obviously a great talent. But what was that like now as you're sitting there and you can't control any of this? Well, I assume were you on the field for the snap, and you weren't long snapping, so
I wasn't the snapper, but I was on the field.
Okay, so take me back to that and what that thought process was, and then of course he sneaks it in the left goalpost and you win the football game. But what do you recall from that?
When I think about Travis Dorsch, Travis is the most naturally gifted punter I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's such a juxtaposition because of the challenges that he had even, in 99 in the bowl game. And, the mistakes at Notre Dame, the missed field goal at Penn State. And again, I felt like, and I can't speak for Travis.
Yeah.
I just recognized that the talent that he was and the performance just weren't matching up. And it really all came down to what was going on in his head. And so it goes back to, do those moments define us, or are we going to take control of this narrative right now?
Yeah.
And so even when he missed that field goal, to me, I'm like, it just makes, we're going to find a way, and it's just going to make the story of this game and this season that much better down the line. And, I just knew that he had the ability. We just needed him to believe it. And up until that point, he had evidence to the contrary that he is the best at what he does. I still believe he's the best that I've ever seen, and I played with some good ones. And it was such a I felt a moment of pride and real admiration for Travis and coming through in that moment, just to show the world who we knew he was. And who, the reason why he was as highly rated coming into Purdue as he was, and the reason why he won the Ray Guy Award his senior year.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well said. When you look also at that year and where you were at the moment, so to speak, and this one I would assume you were not on the field though. Aiken makes a huge sack at Wisconsin. That game's in overtime. They line up to kick a too long a field goal, as it turned out. Mm-hmm. Craig Terrell, another person that, like so many on your team, though Craig was just a redshirt freshman that year.
Right.
Just a unique personality and a tough. But he makes the block. Ashanti picks it up and runs. Where were you, and what again that thought process in terms of getting the job done and getting out of Madison? But that celebration had to be something when you were in that end zone celebrating that touchdown.
Yeah, that was an intense moment, especially, we had played Northwestern.
Yeah.
We played
good team that won share of the Big Ten with you.
Beat Northwestern the week before, beat Michigan 2 weeks before that, and so we're pressing. We're really going all out, and that's the beauty of having a complete team. First of all, special teams. Going back to Travis, we knew the talent he had, and the one thing that when I was in the NFL, Coach Cowher used to always say, special teams is a measure of how good your team actually is, because it involves both offense and defense. And so in that moment, obviously defense came through because Aiken was just being Aiken. Made a play. But in that moment, Craig wasn't a defensive player. He was just a Purdue Boilermaker.
Yeah.
And we did what we had to do to win. And the thing is, in sports, especially in football, a lot of people get a lot of credit. And a lot of people get a lot of blame when things don't go well. And a lot of times, it's not the blame or the credit is not evenly distributed. But against that Wisconsin team, what happened there at the end, the offense, we didn't even play in overtime. In overtime. We didn't even get to play. So what it came down to is it showed who we are as a team. Just like that play at the end where Ashanti returned that touchdown, and when Travis hit that field goal at the end of Michigan, it's the same energy. It was the same thing. It was us showing the world who we are.
And the same group that struggled in special teams at Penn State overcame that. I mean, it's a lot of that makes that story even more amazing. Okay, the following week, Ohio State comes to pass. That your Drew Brees throws five for almost 500 yards, but 4 interceptions. Has the pick late in the game. It looks like it's not going to happen. And Drew is the ultimate leader and the ultimate competitor, as you've talked about. You are on the field, I assume, snapping the ball as you get into that huddle. What do you recall? And again, I can guess what your mindset was, and you know what Drew Brees was thinking about, and yet again, you make the unbelievable play in that 64-yard pass to Seth, but Seth Morales. What do you recall from that? What's your takeaway from that moment?
I mean, the Ohio State game, it was, going back to, where I was at, mentally and emotionally going into the Michigan game. And, the narrative that I shared with the group, and it had played out exactly how we talked about it in that meeting in those first 3 games. So going into the Ohio State game, it was really about, putting the nail in the coffin and solidifying our identity as a team. One thing I'll say about the Ohio State game is, to this day, I've never been that tired in a football game in my life. And like we ran, I think, like 110 plays, and their defense was really good. With Ryan Pickett, Rodney Bailey, and Joe Cooper. Like, they had a good defense, and it was a really, really tough game, back and forth all day. And it's interesting because even in that moment when he threw that pick, and Drew went over there and showed that he could play any position in football the way he hit whoever intercepted
the Doss, right? Mike Doss, was that the pick? I think,
yeah. And it goes to show that we decided weeks ago that we were taking control of this season, and that's exactly what we did. I just remember running that 2-minute drill, and we ran one play. I think Drew threw an incomplete pass on the first play, and then the next play, like, again, I was exhausted, so the snap was a little low. And so I'll admit that it was a little low.
Yeah, it was.
And I'm just blocking, and boom, you just hear the crowd just explode. And I look up and I see Seth in the end zone, and my only thought was, oh, thank God. Because I literally didn't know how many more plays I could run. We were exhausted, and I was just like, oh, thank you. And it was like everything was well in West Lafayette that night. Like no, that was the way it's supposed to end.
That play, and there's a lot, as you know, far more than I, though, all the things that go on to make something work when you got 11 guys on the field. And a lot of Scott Downing, I think, Coach Scott Downing talked about the fact that it was important that A.T. Simpson ran his route extremely hard. It was important. I talked to Vinny last night, and Vinny was Vinny, but it was important that Vinny and John Standiford did their routes because they were options 1 and 2. But, again, you're a leadership guy, and talk about that, and just the fact that, Seth Morales had to stare that ball for 2 or 3 seconds as it was coming to him, knowing that he was wide open. That takes a lot to get that done. Even as exhausted as you were, those guys all played their role to get that play off the way that had to be to get the touchdown.
I mean, that's offensive football.
Yeah.
And, an offense and defense you're playing 2 different games as a group.
Yeah.
And because, like, on defense, you could have a completely blown coverage where every single person is open. But if one guy gets to the quarterback, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whereas on offense, if everybody doesn't do their job, the play is dead.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. It's like, whoever's got, cut off on the backside, whoever's got a go route, even if you're the 3rd or 4th option, you got to do it right. Otherwise, it's going to throw off the cycle and rhythm of what we're doing there as an offense. So, it's, again, showing the cohesiveness of the group. And that we, not only were we all doing what we needed to do, but we were also being who we needed to be. and just go all out, give your best effort, no matter what you're asked to do, just do it.
Yeah.
And you look at somebody like Seth, and that play will live forever. As far as memories of Purdue athletics, but it's just Seth did it every day in practice.
Yeah.
So literally, he was being who we knew he could be, and in the end, everybody executed their job, and everything went the way it was supposed to. I mean, when you got a quarterback like that, if you leave a guy that open, Drew's going to find him.
Yeah.
So
he did. All right, the roller coaster went down. Okay, the following week, the bye week, a key win. Michigan loses to Northwestern up in Evanston.
Mm-hmm.
But then another key game, which I think happened after the following week, you go to Michigan State, a team near the bottom of the Big Ten, but Michigan State is Michigan State, and you don't play well, or they beat you soundly, and all looks lost for a bit until Iowa beats Northwestern and puts you back in position. But what do you recall, and what did you learn, or what did that team learn from that Michigan State game when you lose 30-10 against against a team that on paper maybe you should have beaten?
Well, first thing is the Big Ten. There's no easy games. I don't care who you're playing in the Big Ten, and so all the credit goes to those gentlemen that were playing for Michigan State. I just remember during that game, it was I was just scratching my head. Like it didn't make sense because the previous 4 weeks we were rolling. We felt like the greatest team. We felt like we could play the Green Bay Packers and win.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you get to Michigan State and things aren't going the way that they had been going. And it's kind of like, you ever see like in baseball, like at the World Series where there's, you have the American League and National League, and then one team, like runs to the playoffs and then they got to wait for the other team to get through. And then the team who had the break struggles in that World Series. And what it is there's a pattern interrupt. It's like we were on a roll, and then that bye week, not to make an excuse, but our weekly rhythm got interrupted. And then on top of that, again, having especially young defense, and Purdue, we've been winning for a couple of years, but we were in a new position, as far as being expected to win the way that we were expected to win. And I think that we might have rested on our laurels of the wins from the previous weeks a little bit. And not to mention, those 4 weeks were a burner. They were a burner. And so there was a little bit of fatigue. And one might say, oh, we had a bye week. And I was like, yeah. But did you watch those 4 games before that bye week? So, it was unexpected. But, I think that was our year. And there was a lot of divine intervention, all around the Big Ten that season that helped us to get to Pasadena. And in the end, we did enough to be champions. And Michigan State game was a learning experience to you're never as good as you think you are, and for Michigan State, you're never as bad as they say you are.
Yeah, well said. Well, and you look at that, and you had that one of the rare teams to win 2 games, lose 2 games in conference play, and still win the title, but tying with Northwestern and with Michigan. But you get back on track, and it's all in front of you for the Indiana game. I think Jim Chaney and Montrell Lowe, was it 27 consecutive off-tackle plays or something like that against Indiana. There probably wasn't a lot of doubt that you're going to beat Indiana, though Antoine Randall can cause problems. He did the year before in Bloomington. But what do you remember from that game? And then, of course, the great celebration on the Ross-Ade Stadium turf in that chilly November air.
The first thing that comes to mind actually is 1996 when we were going into that same game.
Yeah,
and I redshirted that year.
Yes,
but I just remember this level of confidence going against Indiana in 96, and then that game didn't go our way at all. No. And so, coming full circle, that was my first Purdue IU game. And so this is my last Purdue IU game. And I just thought, I remember getting ready, in the locker room for that game and thinking a lot about that 96 game. Like, we come, we really done a 180 here as a program. And this is an opportunity to really solidify our legacy as a senior class and our position as a Big Ten power as it pertains to football. And in the end, yeah, they weren't a great team. I will say this, especially playing with L in Pittsburgh for years. I mean, I was telling to his face, like, he was possibly the best offensive player I played against.
Yeah.
In all the years I played at Purdue. But that game we were supposed to win, and we got the job done. And so, you do what you're supposed to do. You'll have what you're supposed to have, and that celebration, the energy of it. By the way, that was my 22nd birthday.
That
was my birthday, and so my last game at Purdue was my 22nd birthday. Big Ten champions, and everything that I envisioned when I accepted the scholarship from Jim Coletto, all the things you imagine doing as a college football player that probably nobody believed, being that we were Purdue.
Yeah.
Well, we decide what the P on our helmet means, and that's what that game was really all about.
A November 18th baby, right? So there you go. That was November 18th, 2000. An unbelievable game. All right, you get the chance to go to Pasadena. As I have told the other guys, my favorite picture of Tom Campbell's is you guys running on the field and Danny Hope turning around to Jim Lathrop kind of with his tongue out like, holy cow, we're here. That memory of not only getting to Pasadena, but being only the second Purdue team to get there, the whole experience, how do you encapsulate that 25 years later?
It was incredible. I remember when we played Southern Cal in that game in 1998, and the next day, Coach Tiller took us to the Rose Bowl Stadium as a group and told us, he's like, normally Big Ten teams don't get to be here unless they're champions. And so just anchor it in now. I want you guys to get used to, the feeling of being in this stadium and make the decision if you want to come back. We lost that game to Southern Cal, but, he put it in perspective. He's like, listen, you might get another shot if you play your cards right to right that wrong against the Pac-10 team. And so that, that image, that experience of actually being inside the Rose Bowl, seeing the purple mountains, San Gabriel Mountains in the distance and all of that, that really stuck with me from 98. And to be back, it was like a prophecy fulfilled. And it was a really incredible experience just the whole week. I was so focused. Like that week, the bowl games, you do a lot of fun stuff, but I was just so locked in. It was the last game I was ever going to play for Purdue. I did end up playing in the Hula Bowl All-Star game, but, with Drew, and Coach Tiller was there too. But this was the last time playing with this team, and, really went all out and did everything we could. And, got to give credit to the Pac-10 champs, Washington. Their defense was pretty good, and their offense was really good, and especially against defense. We had a lot of speed, some great athletes. A lot of those guys are NFL players, but on that day, got to give credit where credit's due, and it was really a privilege to be in that game. And even after we didn't win, all I thought was, I don't want us to be the standard for Purdue football. This is just the beginning. I'm just eager for another group to come in here and finish the job, and still hold that that vision in my mind, and still hold that desire in my heart to see Purdue football be what we proved it can be.
If you had two more questions, and I appreciate all your time. I want to ask you about Drew Brees and obviously, the career he had in the NFL and your close relationship on the playing field and other places with him. Put him into perspective. I mean, obviously, it takes 33. It takes actually a whole roster to have the success that team had. But put him into, you think about these things a lot. What perspective do you put him into, not only in 2000, but as a football player?
When I think about Drew Brees, and I think about my experience of knowing him since we were 18 years old and working together, playing together, getting drafted together, the first thing that comes to mind is he taught me that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And that, a lot of people, talking to kids, especially when we were in the NFL and especially those years, just after we finished at Purdue, and a lot of people say, well, I want to be just like Drew Brees. And I say, okay, do you know what that means? And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. I have never met an individual who competed at everything. Everything. Everything's in competition with this guy.
Ping pong too, right? Yeah.
Ping pong, doesn't matter. Yeah. The thing with him is it wasn't about beating other people. It was about maintaining his standard that he set for himself. And how good can I be? So this is a guy who was the first to practice every day, the last one to leave, go home, do his homework, and come back to watch tape at night. I mean, he was dedicated to being the best that he could be. And it showed up academically at the highest GPA. It showed up in terms of everything he was doing on the field. It showed up in every aspect of his life. And to me, his success as a football player made sense.
Yeah.
Because this is the way he approaches life.
Yeah.
And that's what has made him so great as a football player. But to me, I always remember Drew Brees just as a man and the way he approached life. And to me, that's why he is, number one, when you think about Purdue athletes, I can't think of anybody bigger.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, unbelievable story. All right, you got to fill us in. You've been showing us through 39 minutes of this interview what you do for a living, and people know this, but tell us a little bit about your that you care to share on your personal life and your work life, and what's keeping Chukky Okobi making a difference in other people's lives.
I do a lot of leadership training with high-level performing companies and groups, teams, as well as one-on-one work. Mainly, I like to focus working on transition, working with athletes and transition from one identity to the next. So, I'm a bit of a identity shift expert in helping people to really own their next chapter of life after sports. And it really comes down to most people don't understand, how challenging it can be. Yeah. You start playing sports at maybe 5, 6 years old, and then all of a sudden you're 25, 26, 27 years old, and you get a call from your employer one day, and it goes something like this. Alan says, "Hey, how you doing?" All right. Now I know you didn't do anything wrong, but you're fired.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, you'll never work in this job ever again. Yeah. I guess you're not who you thought you were. Good luck with life. Click. Yeah. And so the mental and emotional challenge of transitioning, it's very similar to stay-at-home moms who all of a sudden have an empty nest, or a law enforcement professional of 30 years who's all of a sudden a civilian, and where their identity is shifted. The difference for us athletes is you're not even 30 years old.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's helping people to heal from the loss of identity, reclaim the control, become empowered in their mental and emotional well-being, and really integrate the lessons they learned from performing in sports at such a high level. And so I bring those same perspectives and lessons to, CEOs, companies, and as a keynote speaker. I actually have a keynote that I've been holding on to for years. And I've never done it, and because when I wrote it, I specifically wanted to speak to Purdue athletes, and the keynote's called Joe Tiller's Secret, and it's really about that cultural change that happened in '97 that led to all of these individuals that we talked about: Matt Light, Aiken Adel, Drew Brees, Vinny Sutherland, Brandon Gorin, Super Bowl champions, Hall of Fame players. And it really all goes back to, what is it that made Coach Tiller, and how did he turn things around so quickly? There's an element of the culture in Purdue athletics that, you know, especially with all the changes that are happening in college sports right now, it can get lost. But the spirit of what Coach Tiller helped us uncover, because it was already in us, is still there. And I would just love the opportunity, as you know, because I speak all the time, and you know, I would love the opportunity to bring that to not just Purdue football, but to the student body, anybody, and really help people to understand what it means to be a Purdue Boilermaker as an athlete, as a student, as a part of our community and family.
Well, here's what we'll do here. You don't need this because you're accomplished and well known as it is. You're going to speed dial to Coach Barry Odom because this speech needs to be heard. And I don't know if you've had an opportunity to be around Barry Odom ever in your life, but I think he has a lot of Joe Tiller characteristics from what I understand. You're right. The world of college football is really different than it was. And he's got 50, 60 new players. New kids on his team that he's going to have to get in. But that message is going to resonate.
Yeah, 100%. And it all goes back to what story are we telling ourselves?
Yeah.
And that was a big thing that Coach Tiller always, you know, brought to our attention. Like, what story are you telling right now? Because if you're saying, well, it's Michigan, and they got, you know, Steve Hutchinson and David Terrell and A-Train, and what are we gonna? Does that story? Do you like that story?
Yeah.
No. So even for the players now, it's like, what story are we telling about being a Big Ten team? What story are we telling about being a Purdue Boilermaker? And you know, in that talk that I created, you know, it was really giving my perspective from the moment Coach Tiller walked in that first meeting all the way through till, you know, I ended up playing with him as a coach at the All-Star game.
Yeah.
And what he meant to our institution, Purdue University. And yeah, I'd love to. I don't know if you know anyone who may be interested in hearing this story.
We'll pass it along, I promise. So, hey, Chukky, thanks so much for your time. One of the best interviews I've ever had the privilege of doing was just this one. So it was terrific. Thanks so much.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out. And yeah, and anytime. And if you want to talk Purdue football, I'm your guy.
Thank you to our guests from the 2000 Rose Bowl team. And, of course, our sponsor, Chariot Auto Group, Twin City, and Nate Barrett and all the good folks there. We'll have another edition of Monday Night Memories with members of the 2000 Big Ten Championship 2001 Rose Bowl team next Monday. And we'll continue this throughout the summer months and possibly even into the football season. So thanks to all for watching and listening, and have a great rest of your week.